Hi, Debbie.
Hello.
Would you mind by starting introducing yourself?
No, no problem at all. My name's Debbie, Debbie Quackenbush, and I'm a psychologist from the U.S. I've been practicing about 32 years, started in the U.S. and now practice here in Denmark.
Cool. So we're here today because I heard something about the Four Horsemen, and I wanted to ask you if you could tell me a little bit about it in relation to couples therapy.
Yeah, I could, and just to sort of reiterate, part of why we're making this is so that my couples who see me can usually I have them review the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse before we get working together, so we have a common language or common understanding about some things.
All right. So what are they? What are the Four Horsemen?
So the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, that's a term that came actually out of the New Testament, out of the book of Revelations, which is a fairly scary chapter if you've ever read it. But it has, in it, it has this thing called the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which are four riders that come, and essentially they hearken that the end of the world is coming. So the Gottmans use this language or use this term to indicate conflict patterns that couples have that predict divorce or breakup. So again, they're predicting divorce or breakup, aka the apocalypse.
All right. So what are the conflicts that he described?
They are, and I think it's important to reiterate that these are all very research based. They come out of over 40 years of looking at couples and coding them and interviewing them and videotaping them and recognizing which kinds of conflict behaviors happen that predict breakup. Before I get into what they are individually, what I want to say, an important reason to note for people to know what these are before starting therapy is it's the one reason, if you're working with me or any Gottman therapist, it's the one reason we'll stop you. So you might be going on about something, and it's an indication, when we spot them, it's an indication that the conflict is not productive anymore. By the way, all couples fight, all couples have conflict. Unless you marry yourself, which most of us don't do, there's always going to be conflict, whether it's chick flicks versus action movies or what you're going to eat for the evening, there's always conflict. But there's productive conflict and non-productive conflict. And what the Four Horsemen do is they help us to know when it's no longer productive. And just to sort of give you a broad overview of them, and they just called them criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Those are the four of them.
All right. Can you tell me something about criticism?
Yeah, I mean, this one is fairly self-explanatory. I think most of us know what criticism feels like. But what criticism is, it's when you're putting down your partner's character. Now, again, all of us have complaints about our partner, whether it's the fact that they don't put the toilet seat down, or that they spice the food too much, or that they're late. A complaint is about the behavior, but a criticism is about the person. So, and complaints are healthy. Complaints can be heard by the receiver, but criticism stops. They make it to where the person doesn't hear the need that you have. And so that's the first one. And by the way, in heterosexual couples, women are more likely to be guilty of this than men.
Mm. And the second one is defensiveness, right? Can you tell me something about that?
Sure. Defensiveness, and again, just to sort of gender it, it's more likely to be used by heterosexual men. And that's when you don't take responsibility for an action, when you sort of deflect blame or you deflect responsibility. You leave the toilet seat up too much. Yeah, but you leave your makeup up on the counter all the time. It's a deflection. It's failing to take responsibility. One really simple piece of advice I give most people is if your partner has a complaint, try to have try to find one thing where you agree that they're right about. Like find one thing you can acknowledge or take responsibility for, and that really can help diffuse a situation. But like criticism, defensiveness it's something that will stop the conversation before, because it means that the conflict isn't productive.
Hmm. And stonewalling is the third one. Can you tell me about that? And do women and men use four horsemen stonewalling in equal amounts?
Yeah, that one's fairly equal. Stonewalling is more like it's when somebody walls off or they shut down in the middle of a conflict. Interestingly, what it can look like, now if your partner shuts down, it's maddening to the person who doesn't understand it. It's like, what are you doing? Aren't you even listening to me? But what they don't realize is that the person who shuts down like that, they're usually physiologically overwhelmed. They're usually flooded with emotion, and the reason why they shut down, it's a defense because they don't know what to do. It's like a fight, flight, or freeze kind of situation. So that's also not productive and can lead to not hearing your partner or not getting heard.
Hmm. And the last one is contempt. Is that also the worst one?
Yeah, contempt is usually the biggest predictor of breakup. Contempt, it takes criticism and goes another step. It's when you lose respect for, or you really have a kind of moral superiority over your partner. So it's like, you're such a liar. I mean, that goes beyond criticizing a behavior, even the person. It's saying globally, you're not a good person. And that predicts quite soon divorce. Interestingly, I think contempt is often nonverbal. One of the initial findings that the Gottman had was that they were having graduate student coders who would look at the couples, and they found that eye rolling predicted divorce. And I mean, what is eye rolling exactly? It's a kind of measure of contempt, like what you're saying is so stupid. But there are lots of kinds of contempt or ways to be contemptuous that aren't verbal, like mocking someone, eye rolling, like I said. Another interesting thing about contempt is it's actually really bad for your partner. Being contemptuous predicts the likelihood that your partner will have health problems as they age. So it's physiologically bad for your partner to exhibit contempt. On another level, one thing that all of these have in common is they decrease the likelihood that you will get heard. So most conflict is about not having some sort of need get met. And what we want to do is help couples to not use the four horsemen so that they can better ensure or increase the probability that their partner will hear them and be able to respond to that unmet need. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I hear you. Do they all have to come in one relationship for the divorce or conflicts to rise in heaven?
No, you only need one to have a negative outcome. I mean, there are some that tend to go together, like criticism often begets defensiveness. That's not hard to understand, right? Somebody criticizes you and you want to say, hey, you're wrong about me. But no, they don't all have to come together. There are a few cycles we sometimes see. There's something called it's called the criticism. I think it's called the criticism stonewalling circle or cycle, where somebody's criticizing and then the person shuts down because they just can't hear anymore, and then the partner gets more angry because their partner has shut down, and then their criticism gets louder and more intense. And so it can really be quite a vicious cycle, but no, they don't generally have to go together.
Why do we do them?
I think, and I often get people to try to reflect on how did their parents display to them that they were unhappy with something? How did they display it to their kids? But also, how did they display it to each other? I mean, we often do what we see. And so often people who have contempt saw contempt as kids. yeah, so I think that's often where it comes from.
Okay, so what would you recommend for couples who want to explore?
Well, I think sort of knowing what your traps are, like, are you somebody who tends toward criticism, or are you somebody who tends toward stonewalling, can help you. But certainly getting with a therapist, and in the Gottman method, we have what are called antidotes to each of the four horsemen. So things that will teach you to do instead of the four horsemen. So when we see it, we stop you and we have you try something different. So that's very much part of the therapy itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much for explaining.
No worries.
All right. Take care.
You too.